Chapter 6. Satisfied that he was no longer being followed, Maximilian climbed the rising pathways to the top of the cliffs, where the scores of cafes overlooked the low part of the city. On the other side of them ran Via Gergasia, one of the Kaliamar's wide thoroughfares, where carts and carriages completed with steam trams. Halfway along Via Gracia to the south stood the steam tower powering the cable car, which swung through the air towards the docks. Yet farther along, the Via ended in the Arantin, where Ador's mansion sat on their stately and cobblestone streets. Max rarely passed in the direction. It lay beyond the realm of workers and factories and universities, where he felt most alive, where he felt the pulsing vitality of the people whom he loved. But the Arantin lurked in his mind like an unexpressed thought. One day the Sedations would march into the neighborhood, not outsiders, but as victors. Max continued up towards the towering, sheer-faced peak of the mountain. His body ached from the beating, and he still felt the unnatural sickening somewhere deep inside him. But he continued on. The pain and the illness would pass. Among him, picturesque white houses nestled one above the other, clinging to the even steeper incline of it. At any moment they might slip and tumble down. The higher he walked, the more the houses thinned, and were interspersed by small cliffs and thick, tough vegetation. In a wide space between two houses, Max stopped and scanned the streets around him for pursuers. He then turned and scrambled up a rough path into a dry brushland, where he entered that might have been a dry and barren sewer outlet, 10 feet in diameter. Yet its perfect circulation, the grooves that ran along its walls, hinted at another lost purpose. Entering the tunnel still excited him. Even after these last years, there was a mystery to a tunnel and the darkness beyond that fired his imagination, as if below the crust of the earth lived a world of possibility. Within seconds he was in the dark, the spring sunlight a sheet of white at the end of the tunnel. With each step the darkness he became more profound. After 20 paces he reached an alcove where 20 or so lamps hung on the wall. He lit one with a match and passed farther up into the tunnel. After some time the path widened, and he passed through the gigantic open door. Here the floor and walls became rough, as if excavation deeper into the mountain had been hastily abandoned. Max continued through the tunnel, rising and falling, widening and narrowing. At places the rocky passage was dry and dusty. At others water dripped from the roof and along the walls. Having passed through the memorized sequence of turns, Max turned and walked directly into the rock wall and passed through it, as if it were not there at all. Max came to a T-section where the walls were flat, and again consciously constructed. Perhaps those who built the underground complex had here accidentally broken through the cave tunnel. Light warmed the walls, and farther down, a heavy door with a wheel mechanism that gave way to a dark cavernous hall, the communal cavern. At its center a number of figures moved around the strange combination of banks, of levers and tables set with glossy surfaces, technology whose use had been long lost and which now lay dead and cold. Wood-fired ovens glowed in the gloom. People sat in reclining chairs and couches. Along one side of the cavern stood 4 black pillars, 15 feet tall, like giant centuries overlooking the space. He inhaled the smell of wood smoke and dampness, and comforting scent that reminded Max of his safety-hidden hopes. Out of the shadows stepped a figure. "Max, there you are." "Cameron." Max's arms hung leadily by his side, a sign of his repressed shame and disappointment. The older man had been waiting for him, and obviously knew that Max had been out in the city. "You're hurt. You were caught." Cameron squinted at him. "It was nothing, just a scuffle," said Max. "It would hurt more tomorrow," he knew. "Come with me, son." Cameron, walking stiffly and unevenly, led him away. One of Cameron's legs was longer than the other, one knee straightened a little more easily. Max knew that beneath those clothes he was bent and misshapen, like a bag into which odd-shaped vegetables had been forced. Max followed Cameron along the side of the cabin, where the walls were marked with flat and shiny surfaces, streams of wires jutting from the walls and fell towards the ground like frozen waterfalls. They entered Cameron's room, with its 100 miniature glittering lights that danced across the walls. Having achieved a new configuration, they would freeze, little clusters of light in new and beautiful arrangement. Then they burst once more into motion, one of the few of the old technologies that functioned in the sedationist phase. Mostly the lights were gone, the levers jammed and broken, the pads blackened, and glass melted. Cameron sat slowly in one of the semicircle of chairs arranged in the center of the room. He gestured to another seat for Max. "So how goes the print workers' struggle?" Max sat in silence. How did Cameron know that he had attended the demonstration? Picking up on the tension, the lights darted rapidly across the walls and suddenly froze in anticipation. He drew a breath and tensed. The words tumbled out. "They smashed their own presses because they have no other ideas on how to fight. It's our fault because we've just left them to work things out for themselves." He waited for a moment. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I was going to observe them." Cameron brought his hands up to his face, his fingers softly dabbing his eyelids. Cameron's movements were always slow and gentle. Max could not tell if he had internalized a state of grace, or was simply old. His face was low, gentle, persuasive. "Max, the art of politics is the art of knowing what to do next and what not to do." Max summoned his courage. "Things are changing in Saler-Mer. The Xanthians are ready to strike on the docks." Cameron stood up, walked across the shelves, and up-picked one of books. "Elder's Decline of the Old World. I found this book deep in the basement at an old music instructor. It had been his grandfather's. He had no idea of its worth and was happy for me to take it. Imagine that, your work, left in the basement, perhaps the only remaining copy. He urges that the conflict between the gods was about more than just their personalities. It was between those who wanted only to pay and dance, and Ea and his followers, and the rest who wanted things to be orderly. After the war, the citizens of the old world, sick of these conflicts, drove the gods away, and then the gods left us. That was the cataclysm, the movement that civilization fell. You should read it. The time of reading is over." Max looked directly into the old man's eyes. The lights increased in intensity, illuminating parts of Cameron's craggy face, throwing other parts into darkness. Cameron laughed uneasily. "You are ready to fight. And you should be. It's only natural, but, Max, look at us. There are 30 of us, only 30. It took us 15 years to build up what we have, to accumulate our scant knowledge of thaumaturgy, to create this library. How can our knowledge compete with that of the houses, with all their history, with all their resources? We cannot get involved in struggles that will only be defeated. We could be 100 in a week, said Max. Cameron ignored him. Slow preparation. The machines. That is what you should put your focus on. Work out what they are, what they do. The machines lay in their vast hall, not far from the chimeral cavern, silent and dead, like the metal bones of huge creatures that shuffle into fine formation and died. Max wanted to say, those machines are useless, broken, but found himself nodding instead. Haven't I led the group through dangerous times? Cameron said. Max looked down at his own feet. When Cameron had first taken him as an apprentice, Maximilian thought that they would conquer the world. Patience, Cameron had said for 4 years earlier, when the group numbered only 18. He had sat quietly in the vast dark communal hall, illuminated by only a couple of candles that lit a sphere around them. Almost all knowledge is hidden in the house libraries. Why don't we infiltrate them? Said Maximilian. They would discover you. If they didn't discover you, you would be changed by them. You would think that you were using them, that your environment would start to shape you. Moment by moment, you would find that you would see things differently, the way they see them. They would not see me. Maximilian spoke a few words, drew the ideograms in the air, and shimmered out of existence. Cameron laughed. You have talent for illusion. Perhaps it is your calling. Maximilian emerged back into the world. No, I will master all forms of thaumaturgy. Nobody can understand all the forms, not even the Saligians of Varimus. When parents didn't scare their children with images of the Elitarum, they spoke about the sordileges. Almost no one knew what they looked like. Some said that they were huge men with rolls of fat dripping down their sides. Others that they were changed in ways that none could describe, their faces hidden by death masks, their power radiating from them like heat. They ruled the city of Varans. 2 weeks marched north through the hills, like priest gods. They were said to each have mastered one of the forms, and had paid a price greater than could be imagined. According to the histories, the gods mastered all forms, Max said. The great goal of thaumaturgy for centuries has been this, unification. The notion that one can step back and create a grand unifying theory, one that connected all of the rambling, desperate, fragmented thaumaturgical forms from alchemy to illusion to transformation. The concept stirred Maximilian's imagination. Are you a god? Cameron's soft voice hovered in the little bubble of light. If you had mastered all the forms, what would you become? Maximilian felt drained from the use of his illusion. He placed his hands on his knees to hold himself up, held the nausea at bay. Next time he would remember to use the protection incantation. Now, 4 years later, Max looked at Cameron's knobby hands. Some knuckles stood up like mountains, and others looked like worn away. He looked at Cameron's body, bent forward in the midsection, bent backwards in the chest, higher up. He looked at the neck, shifted sideways to Cameron's head, looked forever like it might slip off his shoulders altogether. All these effects of a life's work in the maturity. Cameron had been careful to use the art only when he must, even with the charms of deflection and protection. This is what he'd become. Cameron spoke in low, slow tones. Max, you're forbidden from visiting the Zathians. You're forbidden from seeking out strikes. Max stared at Cameron. He was shaken, aghast. The injustice of it cut at him. In any case, Cameron had no right to command him. But Cameron had built the group and its members beyond him. He was a hero in Max's eyes. Max looked down at the floor. You've been a good leader. You've given us everything. I'm sorry to have questioned you. But even as he spoke, Max knew he was not speaking the truth. He was outgoing, Cameron. The older man who no longer a mentor. It was time for Max to strike out on his own. And yet, how could he betray this man who had been like a father to him? But Max would. He would visit the Xanthians and urge them to strike. He would explain his views of the veterans. He would assert his independence. They had no right to refuse him. Cameron leant over and ruffled Max's curly brown hair. You are such a dreamer, a romantic. Oh, if only I were young again. The lights dimmed slightly and moved in gentle waves along the walls, throwing soft silvery light on the small sedationist. Later in the afternoon, Max sat with Amur in Gazelle in the hall of machines. In the darkness, intricate black metal constructions sat like a cohort of fierce and crouching creatures and gigantic skeleton birds. In two directions, the metal shapes disappeared into the shadows. In another direction, a light indicated a distant corridor, lit by a strange purple mist that seemed never to dissipate. A 5 minutes' walk along that corridor lay the communal cavern. The three sedationists sat beyond a machine, a complex agglomeration of pylons and plates, a great metal scaffolding. Deep within, wires and tubes entwined, crisscrossed in a complex lattice. Finger-like vices were attached to its machine-like arms. How long it had sat there, silent as a corpse, none of them could tell. Like all the technology buried beneath the mountains, the machines dated from the time of their ancients. Giselle rifled through one of the several books that lay upon the table, illuminated by a lamp, as Max and Amur pushed and prodded at the machine's arms. It's hopeless. Giselle looked up from his sharp eyes. She ran her hands through her red hair, causing it to form a curly cloud around her head. I only know why Cameron has us work on these things. I don't know why Cameron has us work on these things. The historians have almost nothing useful to add. Listen to what Camilla says to her narrative. And then Alara was tired of Aya's guides. He gathered around him the gods, and they turned on Aya with all their instruments and machines. And Aya, who felt the machines were not a way to happiness, was forced to flee before them. And wherever he travelled, to the clouds and beneath the sea, they pursued him. They dug through the earth like moles. They flew through the sky like birds, and Aya, who had never been afraid, was now afraid. Gazelle looked up from the book. I mean, it's the usual stuff. Machines for flying, machines for digging. Just legends, nothing more than legends. Max and Amur still poked and prodded at the machine. Hey, said Gazelle, are you listening to me? Amar looked over and grinned. The small man's teeth, exceptionally white against his olive skin. Were you saying something? Examining the machine over in that area, he waved his arms in the general direction of Gazelle. Max and Amar had been friends for 10 years. They met as teenagers on the Duran coast to the north of Mer, where officiates mingled with tourists from Thanasis, where directors and officiates lazed in the summer in their grand villas on the coast. Amar's family was descended from the original inhabitants of the region. The parents farmed oysters. Max's parents had run of Darius Pleasure's villas, complete with baths and libraries. Maxim spied Amar in the library, reading voraciously the histories, and the two had become friends, so close that they now had developed almost a language of their own. Then they had both become friends with Nikando, but Nikando was long gone, and wherever Amar talked of her, Max remained silent. Finally, Max had left for the opportunities of the city. Amar had followed a year later when Max was already a confirmed sedationist. It did not take long for Max to convert him. Gazelle put her hands on her hips and pursed her lips in a half-amused annoyance. She started reading again. Like all gods, Aya's ascents had been replicated in the great library of Salinas, where knowledge was contained in 1,000,000 books, and by other strangers and more exotic means. Such knowledge could be drunk like an elixir, so that in but the passing of the moment one could absorb great histories, geographies, or far-away worlds. All the secret of the universe one could taste the spirits of long-dead souls. Even the secrets of the Magi could be absorbed from the library. In the time it took to close one's eyes, all one needed was the code to give to the librarian. Max stood up and looked into the darkness with the thought of the great library of Callianese, sunk so close to them beneath the sea, so impossible to reach. To absorb knowledge in an instant, thought Max. Something more rapid and efficient than reading could that be possible? The secrets of the Magi. Something that would forever change the relationship between sedationists and the houses. Even now he could picture himself standing tall before the house Thematuridis. How they would tremble at his mastery. Then at the head of the sedation army, he would lead the way to demonstrations, one after another in the coming months, until the house structure fell. But he stopped these thoughts. Sedationism was not a place for individual glory. He felt guilty at his ambitions and resolved to refocus his attention on the good of the group. When he returned, he would put himself at the disposal of the sedationists. He would be theirs to command. Now, however, was the time to focus on the machine. He reached into a gap between the metal plates on its great torso. A soft hum emanated from it, and he and Amar leapt back. "What did you do?" Amar's voice bleated. "There was a lever in there," said Max softly. The machine glowed from within with an unnatural green light. The humming increased, and it lurched into motion, shuddering and shaking from side to side. 10 or so arms of some sort unfolded from the scaffolding, and it hoisted itself up on 2 legs. The machine let out a deep groan, as if it had experienced epochs of sadness. Then it shook again, the entire mechanism shifting internally, and it elongated, like a long-necked animal reaching up the leafy foliage. The groan increased, like the call of a wounded beast. Raising one metal claw, the machine dug away at itself, as if something deep within its mechanism inside hurt. Max and Amur both took a number of steps backwards. A deep red glow appeared in the insides of the machine. Max retreated farther from the rush of heat. The pylon's arms and the machine opened out again, retracting themselves to other parts of the machine. What had previously been a socket now became a metal hand. An elongated octagon, which might have been a head, began to shake, and within a whine of rage and frustration the machine collapsed in upon itself, the glow pettering out from the smell of something burning. The darkness enclosed again. "Do you want to try the lever again?" said Giselle. Max glared at her. "You know that Ujan thinks we should pursue other course also," said Giselle slowly. "We might make life unbearable for the houses, break their locks, ruin their carriage wheels," said Giselle. "Even—" Amur looked at Giselle suspiciously. "Even what?" Giselle now approached the machine also. She touched the metal on one of its long arms. The machine bunged. She stood back. "Even strike at their personnel, assassinate the directors and their officiates. You can't shoot a system." Max turned back to the machine. He was torn between the fact it had moved and the debate with Giselle. "I know you support Eugene, but don't you find him overzealous, striking physically against the houses, as if sedation were only a military action? It implies the final test between us and the houses, but before the citizens support us, it's madness. More mad than hiding here in this hole?" Giselle turned to look at him. "Anyway, you misunderstand. You're seeing things upside down. One doesn't attract support from fighting. One fights to attract support. It's a way of showing that things cannot continue as usual, of showing that resistance is possible. Anyway, perhaps you should be worrying about Cameron." Max ignored her comment. "And when does Eugene plan to begin this campaign of his?" "We've already begun. We've struck Techna's tram factory." Max could hardly believe it, and some part of him was zealous. Eugene had the conviction to act without the approval of the veterans. "Cameron will banish him. Cameron will banish all of you." Giselle took Max's arm and turned him away from the machine. "You know that together you'll circle on Eugene's circle from the majority of the crew. Together you can change its direction." Maximilian had a group of 6 followers to whom he was teaching the basics of thermoturgy. Together with Amar, there were 8 of them. With Eugene's group of 10, there were more than half of the 30 sedationists. He shook the idea off. "I would not make such a deal. We stand for complete opposite things. It would tear the group apart." Amar stepped between them. "Sorry to interrupt you, but you realize that this machine moved." Turning his mind from the debate, Max pulled open the step-ladder, climbed up, reached up, and pressed the machine on what looked like a breastplate. The machine quickly dropped down to a kind of squat. Beams of light shot between its metal exoskeleton. From somewhere inside came strange voice squeaking in an unknown language, fragments of sentences. "Al Guatemala, il temer, il injus, il pendentus." A gap the size of a man opened up in the machine's inside, and a platform emerged beneath it. The base was dark metal. The walls of the cavity were formed by imbricated plates of metal, punctured by thousands of microscopic holes. Complex twines of tabbing and wires emerged from the spaces between the plates, while various protuberances seemed randomly scattered. Finally hidden high up within the machine hung something that looked like an inverted flower with its petals opened, like a helmet sectioned onto four. From the walls there was a complex series of open clamps that might close over an operator's forearm. Similar clamps which, when closed, might form a boot of sorts, emerged from the rear of the cavity close to the basic plate. "I'll climb in," said Amar. "No, let me," said Max. "I'll just step inside and see if anything happens. Then I'll step out again." Ignoring Max, Amar stepped up the machine, which still hung gently. He put both hands on the platform and pulled himself up, placed both feet onto it, and his head and torso disappeared in the darkness. He said. "Nothing's happening." He turned around and added, "Oh." The platform rose as the machine straightened itself like a soldier standing to attention. The boots began to close over Amar's feet. "Look at this," said Amar. "What is it?" said Giselle. "Oh my." Began Amar, but he stopped, groaning slowly, and then screamed hideously like a man being tortured. His voice came out with garbled needles. "Amar, Amar." Max and Giselle ran around the machine. The screaming continued. "No, no." The smell of something rotten wafted from the machine, and the thing took 2 jerky steps forward, knocking over the stepladder. Amar's wail gave way to the broken high whine of someone whose voice could no longer contain the power of the cry. Max grabbed the stepladder and placed it in front of the machine. He scrambled up off balance, tried to press the breastplate, but fell down to the floor. Again he scrambled up the ladder, hoping the thing would not move. He reached up, pressed the breastplate, and the machine dropped to the ground. The platform descended. The boots opened. The visors that had clamped around Amar's legs gave way. Moaning, Amar slid from the insides of the thing, blood coming from spots along his arms and legs. He raised his hands to his face, a face that had been burnt so that it was swollen red and blotchy. His hair, once thick and black, was burnt away in several places. Max grasped Amar as he slid out. "Take his legs." Together they hurried him towards the communal cabin, Max holding him beneath the armpits, Giselle carrying his feet. All the time Amar groaned and muttered strange words and stared out into space. His eyes were focusing on another world. Along the long corridor lit the purple mist that carried him. In the communal cabin, other sedationists rushed about asking, "What happened?" Max made a bed on which Amar would lie while Giselle prepared poultices. Amar's eyes fluttered again and moved around until some time later they fixed on Max as he sat beside him. "You should have seen it, Max. You should have seen the visions, the world, the voices." "I can still hear the voices," said Amar. "Il panis it tenebris," he said. "The voices of the angels." When Cameron squatted beside Amar, Max squinted at the old man. "This is your fault,"